Lots of interesting things happened in 1964, but there are two that I want us to focus on today. One, maybe you haven't heard about, but in 1964, I took my first steps, and I have been tottering ever since. It was a big deal at my house. It was a big celebration, as I can imagine it was in your homes as well when somebody took their first steps. Now, the other event that happened in 1964 was heard around the world. People knew that in 1964, Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life in prison for speaking out against the apartheid government of South Africa. Much more important event than the one that happened at my house. But I want you to follow this timeline with me as we think about that. I went to kindergarten, I learned to ride a bike, and Nelson Mandela was in prison. I went on to middle school, went to my first boy-girl dance. Mandela was still in prison. I went on to high school, had my first date, learned how to drive a car. Mandela was still in prison. I graduated. I went to college. Mandela was still in prison. I graduated from college, I fell in love and got married, and Mandela was still in prison. I was preparing for the birth of my first child when the news finally arrived that Nelson Mandela had been released. And it struck me that for all of my 27 years, he had been in prison. And he never, in all that time, lost sight of his vision for a free and equal South Africa. Equality for all people, for black and for white. And in just 3 years, he was the president of South Africa, the first black elected president of that nation. Now, how does somebody go from spending that many years in prison to being the president? How can that be? How can he maintain his vision of freedom for all? I mean, he was criticized for including white people in his vision. He wanted freedom for everyone. But how does that happen? How does someone stay in prison for that long and then become the president and have such grace and such forgiveness? When he was asked about that, Mandela said there are two reasons. One is that his cell was not just a cage to him, it was also a classroom. Mandela said in an interview that the best thing about prison was that he had plenty of time to think. Can you imagine how much time you would have to think? He thought about what he had done in the past, what plans he had for the future, what didn't work, what might work, what should work, what freedom would look like for everybody. And he never lost sight of that. It was an unstoppable vision that he had. Now, his cell was 7 feet by 8 feet. And when he first was introduced to this cell, he had nothing but a straw mat on the floor and a bucket. Eventually, he got a desk and a chair and access to books. And he taught himself. And so that cage became a classroom where he continued to learn and transform, and then he taught other people as well. So that was the first reason he gave. The second reason was the support of people all around him, people in the prison and out. He said if he knew that his suffering mattered to somebody, he would keep doing it. He needed his suffering to matter. And if it made a difference in the life of anybody, he was willing to keep suffering. And that reminds me so much of Jesus this morning. Jesus, who knew he was going to go to Jerusalem and be arrested and executed, and did it anyway, because he knew it would make a difference to somebody. And we're introduced to a couple of those somebodies in our reading this morning. Now, we're in John's Gospel, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I always say this about John's Gospel. Don't read it literally. It's not meant to be read that way. John's Gospel is like an onion or a cake. It has Layers, thank you. Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. So we have to look for the meaning as we read through the story, because it will not be evident. In our story, Mary Magdalene is running to the tomb. Jesus has already been arrested, tried, convicted, tortured, executed, wrapped in cloth, laid in a tomb. All that has already happened. And Mary Magdalene is going to the tomb, and it is still dark. Now, this is the first bit of imagery that the author of this gospel wants us to notice. It is still dark. This author likes people to move from darkness to light as they begin to understand. They don't know what they don't know in the darkness, but eventually the light bulb comes on and they understand. And Mary is going to have this happen, and the author wants us to go with her on this journey. So as she begins to understand, all of us will understand as well. So she starts out in the dark, as we all do. She arrives at the tomb, and I had to ask myself this question this morning: why exactly is she arriving at the tomb? In John's gospel, there's no reason given. We all think, oh, she's going to go, take some spices and wash Jesus's body, and she's worried about how she's going to roll that stone away. Not in this gospel. She is carrying nothing with her, and no one else is with her. If we let this story stand just by itself, she is on her way to that tomb because her love for Jesus is unstoppable. She's got to be where he is, and that's why she's there. She arrives, and the stone has been moved, and she looks in the tomb, and he is not there, and she doesn't know what to do. So she runs to find the disciples. And Peter and this other disciple, the one that Jesus loved, who has no name, they have this crazy foot race. And it's like two kids on an Easter egg hunt. They're trying to outdo one another. And I cannot understand what layer of meaning is in that little race other than a little bit of comic relief. I don't know. But they get to this tomb, they go inside, and the text says they believed. What did they believe? They believed the tomb was empty. The very next line says they did not yet understand. These disciples are still in the dark. The light has not dawned yet. And then they leave. They don't press on. They don't search for Jesus. They just go home. But Mary cannot leave. She is rooted to the spot. She wants to be where Jesus is, and she is not going to stop until she finds him. So Mary looks into the tomb, and she sees two angels, and she never misses a beat. She never says, oh, my goodness, and falls on the ground like people sometimes do when they see angels. She does not pay any attention to them at all. And they say, why are you crying? And she says, where is Jesus? She is unstoppable here. She is going to find him no matter what. She is not leaving until she does. Now, the angels, think about where they are. They're in the tomb, and they're placed, one at the head and one at the foot of the place where Jesus was laid. The author of this gospel is giving us a clue. He wants us to go back to Exodus, to the Ark of the Covenant, this big box which held the presence of God. And on the top of this box are these two angels, one at the head and one at the foot. And these two angels in this empty tomb are telling all of you, the reader, that this is a holy place, that this is where the divine rested, that something special and sacred happened here. But of course, Mary doesn't care at all. She turns away, and she is looking through her tears, and she sees a man that she thinks is the gardener. And she's actually right. This gospel alone places the tomb in a garden. The other gospels do not do that. But here, we're in a garden, and again, a hint from the author to go back now to Genesis, to the original Garden of Eden, where it all began, where people and creatures and all of creation was new. Because now we're in a new garden, another garden, and everything is made new again. The gardener talks to Mary. Why are you crying? And she does not recognize Jesus. Now let's notice that she is not looking for somebody who's standing upright and talking. She is looking for a body. And then he says her name, Mary. And when he does that, she sees him. And again, the author giving us another layer of meaning here, saying, do you remember John chapter 10? The story about the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd knows his sheep and calls them by name. And the sheep know his voice. We see here John chapter 10 acted out for us. And as soon as Jesus says her name, just like that, the lights come on for Mary. She sees him, she knows, she understands. She has moved from the darkness into the light. Just like Nelson Mandela moved from prisoner to president. It's that big of a change. Her unstoppable love for him kept her there in this place of suffering where she is weeping and searching and won't stop until she gets answers. Just like this unstoppable vision that Nelson Mandela had for equality for everybody, for freedom for all. Mary was willing to stay in that place of suffering as long as it mattered to somebody, and it mattered to her. Mandela was willing to stay in the place of suffering as long as it made a difference for somebody, and it made a difference for a lot of people. And Jesus was willing to go through all the suffering that he went through as long as it made a difference to somebody. And it did. Mary's love was unstoppable. Mandela's vision was unstoppable. And Paul, in Romans chapter 8, reminds us that the Spirit of God that raised Christ from the dead is in you. And it is unstoppable. You have everything you need. Maybe you saw yourself in the stories somewhere today. Are you in a situation that feels like a cage? Can it be a classroom? Are you rooted to the spot because of grief and anxiety? Are you willing to stay there until you find a solution? I think many of us tend to be more like Peter and the other disciple. We wade in about up to our ankles and we say, okay, that's enough of that. We're going home now. But the same Spirit that pressed on Mary to stay, to search, that Spirit is in you. And the same Spirit that inspired Nelson Mandela every day for 27 years is in you. And that Spirit is unstoppable. So wherever you find yourself today, whatever your situation is, you can take great joy in it because it can be a classroom. It can be a moment of transformation for you. It can provide solutions because you have everything you need. Everything you need is already in you because of this gift of Christ. And it is unstoppable. And you are unstoppable too.